Yes, sir.
Membrane proteins two types based on position. तो बेटा इसमें एक टाइप तो है that is intrinsic intrinsic or integral or internal
Proteins.
proteins. Then you have the second type, and that is extrinsic. Even you can define them, or you can conceptualize these terms based on just by understanding the terms, the intrinsic and extrinsic. Like, then you have extrinsic. तो मैच चल रहा है बेटा अभी?
आज सर जी पता नहीं, शायद हो। क्यों?
अच्छा, अच्छा। वो कुछ कहीं आई थिंक ये किसी जगह पे कोई बच्चे हैं, शायद मैच देख रहे हैं, इसलिए वो थोड़ा सा शूटिंग शूटिंग कर रहे हैं। एनीवे, peripheral or external proteins. So peripheral or external proteins.
यस सर।
तो ये मेनली ये दो टाइप्स जो हैं वो यूज की जाती है। और देन वी कैन जस्ट understand uh, by studying the some key points, or you can say the key concepts in both of these types. Intrinsic, in, it is started from in, so that it means that something which is inside of the plasma membrane, right? And extrinsic, ex, we commonly use for something which is outside. Or peripheral, something which is outside at the periphery of the region which you are commonly discussing. So
यस सर।
let's talk about the intrinsic or integral internal proteins.
यस सर।
Intrinsic, integral, or internal proteins.
यस सर।
So wait a second. एक मिनट। Anyway, uh, Jupiter, can you hear me now?
यस सर।
Oh, okay, fine. Match each other. Anyway, so let's talk about the first thing, that is intrinsic or integral or internal proteins.
यस सर।
Intrinsic. You can draw a comparison by having you can say a comparison sort of thing, like you can draw a line here, and then you can easily differentiate these both of these types of proteins. Let's for example, the first one is intrinsic,
यस सर।
so and other is extrinsic. So you can differentiate all of these different types of proteins. So intrinsic proteins are those proteins which are embedded in the plasma membrane, right? Because these are intrinsic. So those proteins which are embedded
ओके सर।
in the plasma membrane,
ओके सर।
in the plasma membrane, right?
Yes, sir.
And now that presence of the protein may be partial or completely embedded. Like it is possible that that membrane is completely embedded in the plasma membrane, or it is partially embedded in the plasma membrane.
Yes, sir.
How it is possible? Like for instance, you have this a bilayer, lipid bilayer. So it is possible that you may have a protein like this that is completely embedded in the membrane, right?
Yes, sir.
Or it is also possible that you may have a protein that is partially embedded. Half of the part of that protein is outside and half of that protein is inside of this plasma membrane. So both are intrinsic. It is also intrinsic and this protein is also intrinsic.
Yes, sir.
But the difference is one is completely embedded and other one is partially embedded. So
Yes, sir.
this is the one character that you can differentiate.
Okay, sir.
And the similar character that you can also discuss about extrinsic. So in case of intrinsic, that these proteins occur on the inner or outer surface of the plasma membrane. How
Oh,
it is possible? Like if you have a double layer membrane like this, it is possible that the protein which is present completely outside of this membrane like this, or it may also be possible like it is completely present inside, not in the membrane. Here is the membrane.
yes, sir.
Uh, so these proteins are not embedded. Actually, they are present completely outside or they are completely present inside. So
Yes, sir.
these are extrinsic proteins, right?
Mhm.
So based on their location, you can easily differentiate these proteins. You should keep in mind, if the protein is present inside of the plasma membrane, it doesn't mean that that is intrinsic, because for intrinsic, it is the preliminary condition that should be embedded in the plasma membrane.
Yes, sir.
So if the protein is not embedded, whether it is present outside or inside, so that is extrinsic protein, right?
Sir.
So the next character that we can also use to differentiate these both types of proteins, uh, they constitute 70% of the total membrane proteins. Intrinsic proteins, it means that there are about 70% of the proteins are intrinsic proteins.
Okay.
All the proteins which are present in the cell.
Yes, sir.
So the total membrane proteins are about 70%,
Okay.
right? So external proteins are hardly about 30% of the total membrane proteins,
Yes.
right? So the membrane proteins which are intrinsic, they are about 70%, and the membrane proteins which are about 30%. I mean, the proteins which are present in this position, maybe outside or inside, they are only about 30%.
Okay,
And
sir.
70% of the proteins are present, are embedded in the membrane, right? So
Yes.
this is the main difference, second difference that we can use to differentiate both these types of proteins, right?
Okay.
So this is another character. Now you can also use another concept with this. Uh, they are firmly hydrophobically bounded to the lipid bilayer,
Okay, sir.
right?
Yes.
Because these are the proteins which are hydrophobically bounded to the lipid bilayer. What do you mean by this hydrophobically?
Yeah.
Hydrophilically is something else, it's hydrophobically. It means that they are attached with the lipid bilayer, firmly uh, hydrophobically bounded with that. It means that they are present in that membrane, but uh, they are water hetting. Like they're not going to dissolve in that, or they're not going to facilitate that water in any way, right? So
Yes.
they are hydrophobically, they are present in the lipid bilayer.
Yes.
And all the proteins which are embedded, they are commonly act as a carrier proteins. We commonly use them. Carrier proteins are channels, carrier protein channels,
Oh,
carrier protein channels,
yes.
right? So
Yes.
like this, if the protein is present here like this, so something which is coming from outside that may use this as a channel and to get into the cell. So the proteins which are intrinsic proteins, they are carrier proteins channel, right? So carrier protein channels are the intrinsic proteins, right? So it is another difference. So you can also use this concept for extrinsic as well. So here in this case, we said there is a firm attachment or the firm bound with the lipid bilayer. But
Yeah.
in this case, in case of extrinsic proteins, these are weakly bounded with the plasma membrane because they are already present or outside or inside. You can just differentiate here. No? So
Yes.
if it is a protein, so it is very weakly bounded from outside. If it is present here, the very small part of this is attached with the plasma membrane.
Okay,
But
sir.
in case of intrinsic, there you can easily observe maximum part of the protein is embedded in the lipid bilayer. So
Yes,
it
sir.
means it is firmly bound. It is not easy to detach from here,
Yes, sir.
right? But
Yes.
in case of extrinsic protein, it is the possibility to detach from here because it is not embedded in the membrane. It is present outside or inside of the
Yes, sir.
plasma
Well,
membrane, right?
yes, sir.
So what is the function of these extrinsic proteins? How they play their role?
So they
So
may
there,
receptor or
yes, they may also be act as a receptor.
yes, sir.
And the second thing, they may also be act as a antigen recognition parts. Antigen
Like it.
recognition is also uh, possible because of these extrinsic proteins. So these are the two functions of the extrinsic proteins which are commonly present in the cell,
Yes.
right? So it means we can just give 2 to 3 differences of intrinsic and extrinsic protein based on their, because we have divided these proteins based on their location,
Yes,
how
sir.
they are present in the cell membrane. So if the proteins are embedded partially or completely in the plasma membrane, we call them intrinsic proteins. And
Okay.
if those proteins are present completely outside or completely inside without any embedded position, so that is extrinsic, right? So one is of 70%, other one is of 30%. Commonly, intrinsic proteins are act as a carrier proteins
Yes,
or
sir.
channels, while on the other hand, you have receptor and antigen recognition proteins.
Yes, sir.
So now uh, we can further divide proteins based on their transportation, the route of transportation or the method of transportation. So
Okay.
in here we have divided these proteins based on their position, uh, how they are located. But now we are going to talk about the types of proteins, how they are, because both can act as a transport protein. So based on transportation or transport proteins, we can also divide these proteins as like uh, there are 2 types of proteins. One is channel, right?
Yes, sir.
And and other is carrier proteins,
Okay.
carrier protein, right?
Yeah.
So channel proteins and carrier proteins, you
Yes.
getting it?
Yes, sir.
So now you can also differentiate these proteins. Like if you have a channel proteins, for instance, you can discuss on the one side you can place uh, channel proteins, on the other side you can have the carrier proteins.
Yes, sir.
So you can also differentiate these proteins here as
Yes, sir.
well, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, the channel proteins and carrier proteins, like channel proteins are water filled pores, allow entry or exit of charge ions.
Yes, sir.
Remember, right?
Yes, sir.
So channel proteins are water filled pores.
Okay, sir.
Water
Filled pores.
filled pores. Like I have told you that channel proteins are, for instance, if you have this the lipid bilayer, so the protein will be completely embedded like this. It is started from one end of the membrane, it goes to the other part of the membrane, right? So it acts
Yes,
as a
sir.
complete pipe.
Yes, sir.
That we have called it channel protein. So it is water filled pores uh, that allow or exit the charged ions. So what is their function? These pores, they are providing function entry point or exit point.
Okay, sir.
For what? For what?
For the
Charged ions.
yes, sir.
Charged ions. Charged ions. Because those charged ions will be hindered, will be restricted by the plasma membrane, because plasma membrane has a lipid bilayer, and that lipid bilayer may also restrict or limit the transportation of charged particles, because that is a polar, and polar somehow that will attract or you can say repel the charges which are coming up from outside, because definitely those charges may be positive or negative. On the other side, you have the phospholipids, they are also polar, they are also charged particles, so they have some conflict with the charges which are coming from outside, so they need some protection, or you can say a very protective channel, or the road through which that can move. So these channels are actually providing them as a safe route through which they can pass from one part of the cell to the other,
Yes, sir.
right? So channels are fixed. They have fixed position. Are you getting it?
Yes,
So
sir.
they have fixed
Position.
fixed position. They have fixed position. And on the other side, if you can discuss about the carrier proteins, so carrier proteins have some character. The carrier proteins transport molecules passively, passive transport, right? What do
Yes.
you mean by this passive transport? You know, passive transport is a
Active transport
that may be
without
yes, it is
energy.
possible. Passive facilitated diffusion. It can move molecules, gas molecules through these proteins, but they are not using any R. It is one end the passive transport or active. So active is also possible here, right? So they can flip, right?
Yes.
Flip between two conformation. Flip between two conformation, two geometrical forms.
Yes, sir.
They may change the shape, right? For
Yes.
instance, if you have something like here, I have shown you, if it is present in this side, so somewhere it may flip back and it will be like this,
Okay, sir.
right? So they may change their position
Yes, sir.
by completely flipping. And you know, flip is always at 180 degrees, so something is completely change its position. So it is possible. On the other side, each channel protein is specific for each ion. Remember, these are specific channels. Reza, are you getting?
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by this specific channels? It means that you have specific kinds. If one channel is capable of to transport potassium, so that will not transport sodium. So there are some potassium channels. There are some potassium channels, and similarly you have some sodium channels,
Yes.
right? So they transport a very specific ions through it. All
Yes, sir.
right, G. Have high transport rate. high transport rate, right? So they are synthesized through rough endoplasmic reticle. All right, beta. On the other side, solute molecules are bound to one side, are released from the other side. Are you getting? In case of carrier proteins, I have told you that they may flip or they may change their conformation. So protein may change its conformation. So ion or the particle will attach on one side. For instance, it is attached here. So when it will get into the cell, so it will flip like this. So this particle which was outside in our previous conformation or previous shape, now it will be here,
Yes, sir.
right? So it is because of flipping. So the particle which was outside in the cell in this protein like this. So next on the next moment, it is flipping inside and particle is now inside of the cell. First it was outside of the cell. Are you getting this point?
Yes, sir.
So low transport rate. Here transport rate is low. Low transport rate. Remember, low transport rate. Why? Because this protein conformation will take time. If the this flipping is actually, it will take time. This flipping is not in a moment. This flipping may take some time. So that is why it is it is low transport rate, right?
Okay.
So these are synthesized by free ribosomes. Synthesized by
Right.
free ribosomes, and those ribosomes which are floating in the cytoplasm,
Yes.
right? So this was all about the types of proteins.
Okay, sir.
Are you getting this point?
Yes, sir.
So here we have discussed membrane proteins based types based on their position.
Yes, sir.
One is, I have told you that one is intrinsic, another one is extrinsic. And then you have the classification based on the types of transportation. So one is channel protein, another one is carrier protein. So by using these protein channels and structures, most of the particles, they get into the cell or they come out of the cell, and they always be through these channels or these carrier proteins. Are you getting this point?
Yes, sir.
So this was all about the membrane proteins and their types. All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In our next class, we will discuss about cell signaling, uh, and I will show you that how these proteins and these different types of proteins they play their role in the signaling process.
Yes.
Like there would be some receptor, and that receptor will receive the signal which is coming from outside, and that signal may be in the form of some charged ion, or that may be in the form of some chemical. So that will be very specific signal, and that will attach to the membrane, and how that membrane will process that signal and transport that signal, or to move that, transform that signal into the cell, and how cell will respond it, right? So this, because uh, you have to understand the proteins which are present like in carrier proteins or the channel proteins, because these, the presence of these proteins will help you to understand how cell respond, how cell receives signal. So it is important topic that we have to discuss tomorrow, because you will understand that topic based on the concepts that we have studied today.
Okay.
So that will be you can say a very potential topic that may come in the exam. So we will discuss about it tomorrow. Hopefully. Then we will have a few short concepts, diffusion, active transport, and all these things. So hopefully, I will try to definitely this topic will be completed in this week, right?
Yes, sir.
So okay, then we have the my topics. So I think we can conclude this topic here,
Yes,
and
sir.
we will discuss next.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.